Welcome to Caregiver Cast with Mary Elaine. Are you overwhelmed raising a family, working full-time, caring for a parent or grandparent? It can be challenging when you're doing it alone. Caregiver Cast helps busy, burned-out professionals reduce their stress and overwhelm to create a better caregiving experience for themselves and their loved one. Caregiver Cast brings caregivers together with experts who provide information in a variety of areas. In each episode, you'll get tips on topics such as finance, legal, medical, self-care, community resources, mindset, and more. We're here to make your caregiving journey a more rewarding one. Acquire the confidence and skills to be a more capable caregiver by implementing the resources and strategies from these expert thought leaders. Get a community of support, resources, and strategies for your caregiving journey inside the Caregiver Lifeline community. Visit caregiverlifelinecommunity.com. And now here's your host, Mary Elaine.
Hi, welcome to Caregiver Cast. I'm Mary Elaine, your host. I'm just going to give you a disclaimer here that this information that will be provided on this podcast is to give you some options for you to consider as a caregiver. I also would like to inform you to do your own due diligence regarding the information provided by our guest here today. My guest today is Konni Harrison, who will be discussing how to do some estate planning conversations with family members so that it can be one of easy conversation versus one that can end up in a heated discussion. So before I introduce Konni, I'm just going to give you some background information about her. KMH Unlimited was created in 2003 for one reason: to problem solve for her clients that did not involve the brokerage firm that she was affiliated with, and yet was investment related. Over the past 2+ decades, client and colleague requests combined with her experience and passion, KMH Unlimited has evolved into a first-class consulting financial communications firm for individuals, entities, and families. In 1991, her mother passed away unexpectedly, and she was devastated. Within 3 years, she ran away from home, sold her business, left her marriage, and Illinois to spend the next 2+ decades traveling throughout the country, exercising racehorses in the mornings, and working with investments and financial communications consulting in the afternoon. As the first person in her peer group to lose a parent, she had spent the subsequent 30 years as the go-to expert, helping friends, family, colleagues, and clients navigate the waters of loss, distribution of assets, taking care of 4-legged family members, and 2-legged family communication. The heartache of family battles can be avoided. Welcome, Konni, to Caregiver Cast. And please let us know how caregivers can have those easy conversations with family members instead of it being so tragically devastating. So can you give us an idea of how you go about doing that?
I certainly can. And thank you for having me on. I certainly appreciate the opportunity to help as many people as I can navigate those conversations that everybody knows that they need to have, and they do this, and they hide, and they hope that they don't need to do it. And the farther time goes down the road, of course, it gets more difficult to have those conversations. I started my career in the investment world with introducing 2 new asset classes to the world, which I loved doing. But I quickly discovered that there was a very large disconnect with the investors or potential investors and the companies and the investments themselves. So what I tried to do was make things very simple for people to understand, which is important, because if you don't understand it, then there's no point in going forward. And when my mother passed away, she passed away very unexpectedly. She was only 44 years old. I was devastated.
Oh my
Yeah,
goodness.
she was very young. And I was an only child. Well, I still am an only child. I love when people say that. I was an only child. I still am an only child. But anyway, and it was hard. And my folks had been divorced for under a year. So there was lots of moving parts. There was lots of confusion as to how this goes forward. And of course, you know, I was 24, so I had no idea how to navigate this. I just jumped in and gave it my best shot. But what I found is it's much more along the lines of just being afraid to have that conversation.
Yes.
And as friends came to me when they started losing parents, and colleagues came to me going, you know, I have this client that is dealing with X, Y, and Z. And, you know, people get their paperwork in order, right? They've got everything, and they're all organized. They've talked to an estate attorney, and then they think it's done. But what I found, if you don't have that conversation with your family, that there's just a battle, because at some point in time, mom promised this ring to 4 different people, and all 4 people are battling it out, right? It gets challenging, and I don't want people to lose the rest of their family when they lose a, you know, patriarch or a matriarch of the family unit. And it's crushing to families. And I would much rather help people to have this conversation than to have them call me, and whether they're the executor of an estate or whether they are a family member who thinks that they should get, you know, I'm happy to help, but it makes your life so much easier if you address these things before anything happens. And a lot of times people are dealing with the struggles of a parent going into an assisted living, or they're downsizing, or, you know, one of them has to go into an assisted living, and what does that look like? And the family members are all trying to help. And as caregivers, you know, I'm sure that you've seen this, you know, all the time. So it's difficult. It's very challenging to do that. So, you know, I like to try and reconnect people with each other and make that conversation a little easier to have.
Oh my gosh, you are a lifesaver, because a lot of families either don't have like all of that paperwork done, the financial, the medical, and the legal information and final expenses even laid out to begin with. And then there's an emergency, and no one can step in to make those medical and financial decisions. And like you say, then family members are fighting over who gets what in the estate. And like you said, certain things are promised to people. It's never been written down. It's never been documented or even discussed within the family unit. So then you have this huge disagreement. And then you're right. It does start to sever family relationships, and it doesn't have to be that way. So what do you recommend to people to prevent having those devastating conversations and severing family relationships?
Well, every family knows each other's triggers and each other's histories and each other's backgrounds, and, you know, kind of what makes them tick. Of course, when the in-laws come into the equation, that gets entertaining as well. So I think that it's super important to know, if you have the courage to start this conversation and call that family meeting while the parents are still alive, or, you know, even if you're in your 30s and 40s, you know, just to make sure that your, you know, that your paperwork is in order. That's important. But I think the very first thing that you need to do is you need to figure out who you're doing this for. Okay. Are you doing this for mom? Okay. Is she the one that's going into a assisted living place, or are you doing this for a friend? What is the conversation? Who is the conversation centered around? You know, because ultimately it's their wishes. It has nothing to do with the kids and the brothers and this. No, this is all about them. And I think once you take that pressure off of yourself to think that you have to bring this together and you have to fix it, that, you know, once you realize that you're doing it for somebody else, and as caregivers, you're doing something for somebody else all the time, you know, that makes it a little more palatable. So I think that that's the first message to get across, you know, when you're starting to go through this process. You know, we need to do this for mom. We need to do this for dad. We need to do this for our kids. We need to do, you know, whatever the scenario is. That way it doesn't turn into me against them type of scenario. So right off the bat, you've brought everybody together for a common goal. And I think that that is really important to start the conversation. And if that's clearly laid out and clearly expressed, then, you know, whoever is starting this conversation won't be the bad guy. You know? So that's hugely helpful. And it doesn't have to be done all at once. You know, it can be a process, you know. Things are always moving and always fluid, you know. And I think the other thing that everyone needs to remember is that everybody's afraid, right? Everybody is afraid to have this conversation. Everybody is afraid because and I've had people say to me, well, if we talk about it, then it's going to happen. And I said, if you don't talk about it, it's still going to happen. You know? We're not getting out of this world the way we are right now.
Right. Exactly.
So it's important. And it, you know, and again, if you take the pressure off and the fear away and realize that you're doing this for someone, it makes it a little easier. And just starting and you're going to get pushback. You know, you're going to get some family members that straight arm, you know, well, I don't want to do this. I can't deal with it.
Right.
You know, well, how do you handle those conversations? Well, you say, well, you know, it has nothing to do with you and everything to do with mom or dad or, you know, the kids or what's happening there. So I think that kind of puts everybody at a little more positive, even playing field.
Exactly. Thank you for starting the conversation that way. I think you're right. It's just a starting point to get the family together. And like you say, focus in on the specific person or persons that you want to discuss the situation around and how to make or put in place those protections so that if should anything happen unexpectedly, then everything is taken care of. All the family members know exactly who's going to do what, when, and everything else. And that's a great way to start the conversation. Has there ever been a time, though, when it starts out really amicable and then turns into something monumental because somebody is not really focused in on the person or the people involved in the situation?
Yes. And unfortunately, that happens probably more than half the time. Because again, what you're dealing with is it's not going to happen to us, you know, and everybody becomes an ostrich. But when push comes to shove,
Mhm.
you know, somebody has to have that medical power of attorney to
Yes.
make sure that somebody can make some decisions. A lot of times what I see, and I'm sure as caregivers, you see the same thing. Somebody is starting to slip toward the dementia spot, and people do this, you know, and then they kind of, it typically starts out as a little bit, could you believe that? You know, mom thought it was Easter. It's not Easter, it's the 4th of July. You know, that happened to me with my aunt once upon a time. She called to wish me a happy 4th of July, and it was Easter, you know. So I
Okay.
called her kids and I said, guys, I think we have a little bit of an issue that we need to deal with. And so if you pay attention as well, you'll be able to address these things as they're beginning to unfold. Because what can happen is you can get in a situation where your parent is slipping, and it has to be addressed, because, you know, at least to have your power of attorneys in place. So, and to have that discussion before somebody starts to slip, especially if it's been in your family, right? And everybody knows if it's in your family or not, because they all have a crazy Aunt Fred or Aunt Susie, you know, or Uncle Fred that's, you know, doing weird things. And so, you know, and having the courage to have those conversations is super important. And when all is said and done, you're going to feel so much better. You know, whether or not the family all fought or whether they didn't is irrelevant, because you're going to know that you did everything you could to make sure that your loved ones are respected. That's another biggie. You know, you have to respect everybody's feelings and everybody's fears, and everybody's mortality that comes glaring in their face when you do these things. The other thing that I think is important is keeping all of your financial professionals talking to each other, you know, your CPAs and your estate attorneys, and you know, your financial planners, and you know, all that kind of thing. Because then if they're on board and talking to each other in the background, it's not going to make it nearly as daunting for the family that's talking about it in the foreground. So then all you have to worry about is each other and taking care of each other.
That's so great advice. I mean, I think you really need to get all that documentation in place with, like you say, all those moving parts. And by having like your financial planner, your CPA, your attorney, all talking on a regular basis, they know as much as the family does, or about the person or the people involved. Let's say your parents, and know their wishes and what their plans were, you know, financially, medically, and legally. So, like you say, it's so much easier for the family, especially if they're having to deal with an unexpected emergency, or now if they are going through the grief process. So you're offering some really great advice.
Thank you.
Can you tell us a little bit more about what other situations might arise when families are going through this family discussion, and making sure that everybody's at least on the same page, regardless of like their fears or expectations for the outcome?
There's a couple of easy ways to start, or less threatening ways to start. Does the family member that you're concerned about, that you're having this conversation around, do they have a safety deposit box? Well, who has the other key? You know, does somebody have this key? Are they on the safety deposit box? Well, I don't know, you know, that kind of thing. And what about, the titles of things? Because what I have run into several times is somebody dies unexpectedly and you have no idea how are you going to pay for things? Where is the cash flow? So there's, having the conversations around, well, does anybody know where the title to the car is? Because who is the car registered to? Who is the title? What is in the, whose name is the title of the car in? So you can start with these, what about the deed to the house? Right? Is it in mom and dad's name, or is it just in dad's name? Is it just in mom's name? Is it in a trust? How these things are titled, and going through and getting the kind of the information first as a group. Don't do it on your own, because then it's going to be a mess, unless the family goes, I don't want to do it, you do it. That's a whole different ballgame. But if you have the conversation and everybody kind of knows, well, all right, well, I'm going to figure out who holds their investment accounts, and you're going to figure out, whose name the deed is into the house, and you're going to, is there still a mortgage on it? Is there, all these little things. Does mom and dad have a life insurance policy? Those things are tangible, doable items that if you divvy them out a little bit, it becomes a group effort to do these things. Now, if you have, where it gets really sticky is if there is one family member out of a family of three, say, and one family member is not working, so they're taking care of mom and dad. Okay. Then we need somebody to say, okay, well, and it can get very trivial, but it can lead to much bigger things, right? Well, are you grabbing groceries for yourself on mom and dad's credit card if you're doing this? The easiest way, the most straightforward way on the planet to do this with a family member who is willing to take care of a parent or parents is pay them. So they don't, because you never want the family member who's doing all the caring, right, to feel like they're getting taken advantage of. Right. And you never want the rest of the family to think that the person that's caring for the mom and dad is taking advantage of mom and dad, because then it's a train wreck before anything happens or anything starts, right? So, when you're having these conversations, bring it down to that, because this gives everybody a chance to say, well, if you're going to spend X amount of time per week, what do you think that's worth? That way, nobody's thinking that they're getting taken advantage of or that they're being taken advantage of if you have that conversation up front. And if it's a group effort, that's absolutely fine. Have it be a group effort. Nobody gets paid, right? I mean, everybody's working, whatever the scenario is, make it work so you're all included in those decisions, instead of after the fact going, well, Fred did this and, Gloria did that and, that kind of thing, because then it just turns to finger pointing. And then you are not dealing with the issues, and which nobody wants to deal with anyway. So they find it easy to go, well, you did this and you did this and you did that, then it becomes trite and petty, and then nobody wins. And everybody's going to have those family members that go, well, back when dinosaurs were roaming and the earth was cooling, I did this for mom and dad. Well, congratulations. But be honest and acknowledge that this is a hard conversation, and acknowledge that, everybody deals with these things differently, and have the respect for each other. Even if you don't like each other at the time, you still always love each other. to have those, conversations. So at least everybody's aware, because it's the being blindsided, from my experience, is what really tears people apart.
I totally agree with everything that you said, because you're right. If somebody does start to take care of a parent or parents, and yes, they are kind of in a way drawing a salary because they're not working full-time somewhere, other family members, because they don't understand the relationship that was made with their sibling and the parent, they start to think that, like you said, that they're being either taken advantage of, or they're not getting part of their inheritance, or that they're not going to get whatever item or items that
Yes.
promised to them. And I agree, it's so challenging. And then you also have your digital assets with your passwords and everything else. And unless people know exactly where to find all that information, it can turn into a huge monumental task in terms of sorting out all the individual pieces and finding things so that everything can be distributed the way the parent or parents want it. So I totally agree with what you're saying. I think, fortunately for me, my parents had their medical, legal, and insurance information and final arrangements and living will and things like that in place. I wasn't prepared, though, to have to go to court 2 days before Christmas to seek guardianship for my mother, because my father was in denial that she had Alzheimer's. So you're going to get a curveball sometimes like that. And you just have to kind of make that decision of what you're going to do. Any other considerations families should think about when doing this estate planning, so that when something does happen unexpectedly, like in your case, like you're with your mother, it would ease, I guess, this possible conflict that would arise between the remaining siblings or other family members?
I think that if there is a will and you know who the executor is in that will, the clarity there is important. But something that people tend to not realize is, if your siblings are spread across the country and your parents are in a different state, excuse me, every state has its different laws. Okay. Every state has its different parameters. So, for example, I was helping a friend of mine a couple of years ago. His mother passed away in Nevada. Okay. She's from Illinois, but when she did her will and her trust, everything was in Nevada. So it doesn't just flow to there can be some hiccups unless you know that you have to adhere to, doesn't matter where you are, but you have to adhere to Nevada law, right, to get things moving or distributed. And some states say that you have to go to probate. I believe California just passed that not too long ago, that every single estate goes through probate. And probate does not have to be scary. I think my free gift to you guys is all the definitions in layman's terms, so everybody can really understand them, and what it is, whether it's a document or it's a process or it's a person or it's a law, whatever that is. And so it's probate doesn't have to be scary, because all probate is a process where they look at the will
Mm-hmm.
and then they go from there. So it doesn't necessarily mean that, somebody is, contesting a will is different. That's a completely different ballgame. But know where those documents are located. That, and making sure that everything is titled. So it's accessible to the people that need it for those final arrangements. That's important. That's important. So, pay attention to what state those docs are in.
Okay. Great information.
Thank you.
Can you give our caregivers 3 takeaways from our discussion today?
I can give it a shot. Hiding doesn't work.
Thank you.
It would be really great if it did, but hiding and being an ostrich doesn't work. And having the courage to take that step is huge. And there is no bigger gift that you can give to your family than showing them that you love them enough to want to keep them together if something should happen.
Oh, wow. That is very profound. Thank you.
It's a big gift. It's a big gift. And as far as the legal and the rest of that, try really hard not to give advice from somebody or to get advice from somebody down the street. Interview a couple of different estate attorneys and see what is a good fit for you. And it's because it's about the connection, because every attorney can throw a legal doc together, whether they're creative or, it doesn't matter where in the, in the pay scale you are, but they're all trained the same way. But finding one that you can work with is huge. And if you don't understand something, ask the question. Don't let them talk over your head and make you feel like they're smarter, so you have to hire them. All right, don't do that. If you have those questions, call me directly or email me or something, because you are not, you do not have to work with anybody. You are hiring them. Don't ever forget that. They work for you.
Thank you. Well, that I love that. Don't hide. Give your family a gift of getting all of this documentation in place so everyone knows where it is and how it needs to be distributed so that everybody gets what they are expecting. And like you said, just hire someone that you really feel comfortable with, and ask those questions, because questions make you much more knowledgeable, because you may be giving that information to a sibling or another family member. So great advice.
Absolutely. And as you go through the process, be patient, because it's hard for everybody, and everybody is on a different, well, not everybody is always on a different, but some family members can be in a different mindset that day. Give your family the space to grieve, whether it is grieving because someone is lost or because something is changing in their life, because people grieve for different reasons. And sometimes, you're grieving because, because mom or dad have to go into an assisted living, and it's okay, but recognize that that is also part of grieving. Even if somebody doesn't die, you still grieve when you lose, something, whether it's your comfort level, whether it's, your norm. it doesn't matter what it is. So give your family the space to be them. So try not to hit them in the head with a 2x4 too often, unless they're really hiding like ostriches. And then you just got to pull them up by their feet and go, you have to do this.
Exactly.
But you know your family.
Right. Yes, that's another golden nugget. Thank you. Yes. Be gentle with each other.
Yes.
Everybody's going to be on a different wavelengths, and everybody can have had the same experience with the family member, but think of it in a different way. So, yeah, just respect one another and give everyone the time to understand what's going on so that they can make a more informed decision with the rest of the family members. So thank you so much for that. And you have a free offer for our audience, Konni. So can you tell us about that?
Yes. Yes, I have given, it's not a worksheet, but it's a definition sheet. It's kind of a summary with some of the nuances that was in today. I do have a course up on my website, which is kmhunlimited.com, that you can go in and get. Don't hesitate to email me with any questions. And I think Mary, you'll put that up so we can, so everybody knows how to get a hold of me if they have certain questions that they have. But the definition sheet is, I'm all about simple and human terms. I am not going to be an attorney that needs to talk up here. So there is that. And so yes, so please take advantage of that. Grab the worksheet, grab the definition sheet, grab my email. If you have a question, don't hesitate to reach out. And if you're interested in the course, it's a 3-step process. It's very straightforward. There's worksheets in there that, yes, you have to do in order to make the conversation easier. But actually it was up on the Tony Robbins platform for a while, which was kind of fun. Yeah, that was kind of fun. I was one of their initial course putter-uppers when they launched their new program a couple of years ago, but I have since moved it to my website. So anyway, so I hope everybody, takes a deep breath, looks at this with love, and not a chore, and keep your family together. That's all I ask.
Thank you so much. That was very profound. Yes, let's keep family members together. Have those conversations, no matter how challenging they can get. It will really assist the family when they have to start distributing like the will and all of the money and the financial aspects. So Konni, thank you so much for coming on today and giving us this great lesson about how to really cooperate with one another so that and keep our focus on the person or the people involved. So thank you again for being here.
Thank you. Good luck, everybody.
Thank you for listening to the Caregiver Cast today. Get a community of support, resources, and strategies for your caregiving journey inside the Caregiver Lifeline community. Visit caregiverlifelinecommunity.com. Get involved with the show. Send your email to mpetrusi2002@gmail.com. And we'll see you again next week for another episode of Caregiver Cast.